Our neighbor wanted to take our house away from us, but karma caught up with her, and then she was billed for $250K. Before we dive into the tale, let's introduce the main characters. The entitled neighbor will be known as Nancy moving forward, and her spoiled son will be referred to as Sam. Additionally, there's the previous owner of our house, who we'll call Tom, though their role is minor. Keep in mind that from the time we purchased the house until now, nearly 14 years have passed. Unless otherwise noted, assume substantial time gaps between most events described. Let's begin by setting the scene and providing some background. Most of this occurred before we acquired and moved into the house. Nancy owned a sizable tract of land situated a considerable distance from a well-known recreational lake in our vicinity. Although it's down the road, it's actually quite a journey away. The road Nancy lived on was the sole route leading to various lakefront properties and resorts, including the most frequented boat dock on that side of the lake. The properties here weren't so pricey that ordinary people couldn't afford them, but some were quite valuable, attracting wealthy passers-by. This detail will become important later. Nancy, being affluent and possessing a large portion of land, decided to divide her property into 4 roughly equal segments when her children reached adulthood. One piece was given to her daughter, who surprisingly turned out to be a decent person given the rest of the family. Another segment went to her son, Sam. Nancy constructed houses on both properties to her children's preferences. On the 4th piece of land, which did not have her own house on it, she built a small convenience store. This will also play a role later. For reasons unclear, likely to prevent future conflicts, Nancy transferred the property deeds to her children. As you might expect, this set the stage for problems. While her daughter was respectable, Sam turned out to be a reckless party enthusiast. The neighborhood despised him for his loud, disruptive late-night parties that occurred almost every night, disturbing everyone's peace. The police were frequently called to his house, to the point that they seemed to have someone always nearby. His sense of entitlement was likely exacerbated by the fact that Nancy paid all his bills. She kept all utilities in her name: water, electricity, trash collection, everything went to her mailbox, except for one crucial bill. Since the property was in Sam's name, so were the property taxes, which he never passed on to Nancy and simply ignored. Nancy either didn't think about it or assumed he was taking care of it. It wasn't surprising when the police eventually showed up at Sam's house. However, it was a shock when he didn't return, and the house went up for auction. By this time, the house was in terrible condition. There were holes in the drywall and a massive gap in the living room floor leading to the garage basement. The kitchen floor and subfloor needed complete replacement, and almost all the walls were filthy. Sam's reckless partying left the house in what the bank deemed an uninhabitable state. As a result, only those who could pay in cash could afford it. Enter Tom, a house flipper, though not one of the wealthy elite. Tom wasn't one of those high-profile house flippers you see on TV. He was more of a passionate hobbyist. As a retired man, he flipped houses to stay active and engaged with the community. Tom would purchase houses like ours at bargain prices through auctions, renovate them himself, and then put them back on the market. While working on each house, he lived off the profit from the previous sale. By the time he completed renovations and was ready to buy the next property, his funds were typically running low. Any leftover profit went into a modest emergency savings fund, which he modestly admitted wasn't anything substantial. We were in the market for a new home, but couldn't afford anything too pricey on our tight budget. When we stumbled upon this house listed on a real estate website, it seemed ideal. The size was just right, the neighborhood was appealing, and it was conveniently close to a lake we enjoyed for fishing and boating. It appeared perfect in nearly every way, though we were concerned about the price, which wasn't listed on the website yet. Still, we thought it wouldn't hurt to take a look and see what it was all about. We drove by and found Tom diligently working on the house. We decided to stop and introduce ourselves, and during our chat we inquired about the price. Tom explained that he was in the process of renovating it for sale and that his realtor had added it to the website's database for future listing. As we sat down and conversed, we found Tom to be quite friendly, and he appreciated the company. We expressed our interest in buying it at a reasonable price, considering its current condition and the work he had already invested, as he had it about halfway done. We mentioned our dream of making it our forever home. Tom, however, initially declined. explaining that he had several offers and didn't feel right selling it before completing the renovations. We thanked him for his time, left our contact information, and asked him to call us if he ever changed his mind. Less than 2 weeks later, we received an unexpected call from Tom. He explained that his sister had fallen ill in another state, and he wanted to be with her. Lacking the time and patience to finish the house, he offered to sell it to us at a reasonable price, despite it not being up to code. We eagerly agreed and started our search for banks willing to finance our purchase. With assistance from a realtor friend, we managed to find a bank that agreed to the loan, provided we brought the house up to code within 2 weeks, or they could default on the loan and auction it off. After explaining our situation to Tom, he generously offered to help as much as he could. Though he couldn't do any more work on the house due to his rush to leave, he provided detailed guidance on what needed to be done to meet code requirements. He meticulously outlined the time, effort, and cost involved. Additionally, we secured a loan for twice what he asked for the house, and he gave us back the surplus, which we used for necessary repairs. Thanks to Tom's previous efforts, the house was nearly up to code, and we managed to complete the essential work with the help of a few good friends, finishing ahead of schedule. However, there was still plenty left to do. We spent several months replacing the flooring and subflooring, rewiring the entire house, patching holes in the walls, and painstakingly removing old, decomposing wallpaper that was directly stuck to the drywall. It was a massive undertaking, but we were determined to make this house our home. We poured a tremendous amount of effort, energy, and heart into restoring the house, turning it into a beautiful, welcoming home. Once we finished our extensive renovations, it was finally time to move into our dream home. Despite a few minor issues that we planned to address over time, we were excited to settle in. The excitement was palpable as we began moving our belongings, envisioning a future full of memories in this perfect place. However, as we were still in the process of moving in, Nancy, the neighbor, came over to introduce herself. During our brief interactions with Tom, he had warned us repeatedly about Nancy and her entitled attitude. He mentioned how she had a reputation for being difficult and demanding, but initially Nancy seemed incredibly nice, and we couldn't understand why Tom had been so cautious. She greeted us warmly and even brought over a homemade pie as a welcome gesture. However, as our conversation was wrapping up, Nancy's tone shifted. In a very kind and compassionate manner, she informed us that our house actually belonged to her. She claimed that we had 30 days to vacate the premises. Nancy expressed her sympathy for us, explaining that we had been scammed and that Tom had no right to sell the house to us. We were horrified, imagining that all our time, effort, and money had gone into a house we were about to lose. The thought of being tricked and losing our dream home was gut-wrenching. We thanked Nancy for her explanation and assured her we would investigate the matter. We immediately contacted the bank, who confirmed that Tom was the legitimate owner of the deed. We also spoke with our realtor, who corroborated the bank's information. Tom further explained that Nancy had accused him of stealing the house multiple times since he bought it at auction, and that she had continuously harassed him over it. Every person we spoke to, including courthouse officials who confirmed our name on the deed, provided the same story. During this process, we also learned more about Nancy's son, Sam, from several neighbors. They described him as a reckless party enthusiast whose negligence led to the loss of the property. Apparently, his constant partying and failure to pay property taxes resulted in the house being auctioned off. This backstory gave us a clearer picture of why Nancy was so adamant about reclaiming the house. A few days later, Nancy returned, asking when we would be moving out. We explained that we legally owned the property and that it wasn't our fault that Sam lost it. We expressed our sympathy for her loss, understanding that it was likely difficult for her to lose a family property due to her son's negligence. However, we made it clear that we wouldn't just give up a property we had invested so much into. Nancy then launched into a long, emotional tale about how the property had been in her family for generations and how Tom had stolen it during the turmoil of her son's arrest. Nancy recounted how her family had cherished this land for decades, how many family gatherings and celebrations had taken place there. She painted a vivid picture of their connection to the property, making it clear that this house meant the world to her. It was heartbreaking to hear, but we knew we had done everything by the book. We asked why they hadn't bid on the house at the auction, especially since we had purchased it from Tom for only $70,000. Considering that Tom made a small profit even after his work and materials, they could have easily reclaimed it. Nancy argued that they felt the house was rightfully theirs and refused to pay for it. We reiterated that we weren't going to take a loss on the property, especially after all the time, effort, and additional $40,000 we had invested in materials. We explained how much we had put into the house, detailing the sleepless nights, the physical labor, and the financial strain we had endured. It was more than just a house to us, it was a culmination of our hard work and dreams. In an attempt to be sympathetic to her situation, we offered to sell the house to Nancy for a very reasonable price of $130,000. Given its location and the improvements made, this price was still just over half of its total market value. Considering that we bought it for $70,000 and invested an additional $40,000 in renovations, we felt this was a fair offer. We even offered to help her with the financing options, suggesting ways she could manage to buy the property back. Nancy seemed taken aback by our offer. She had expected us to either vacate or to sell it to her for a pittance. We gave her time to think it over, hoping that she would see the fairness in our proposal. In the meantime, we continued settling into our new home, gradually making it our own. Despite the tension with Nancy, we tried to build good relationships with other neighbors. Many of them were supportive and shared their own experiences of dealing with Nancy and her son. They reassured us that we had done nothing wrong and that we were within our rights to stand our ground. After a week, Nancy came back with a counteroffer, but it was significantly lower than what we had proposed. We patiently explained once more why we couldn't accept her lower offer, reiterating the investment we had made and the fair market value of the property. We also reminded her that our offer was already a considerable discount, taking into account her emotional attachment to the property. Finally, after several discussions, Nancy reluctantly agreed to our original offer. It wasn't the outcome she had hoped for, but it was a resolution that allowed her to reclaim her family's property. We prepared the necessary paperwork and coordinated with our realtor and the bank to facilitate the transaction. While the situation had been stressful, we felt a sense of relief that it was resolved amicably. We moved on to find another home, but we always remembered the lessons learned from that experience. It taught us about the importance of due diligence, the value of empathy, and the strength to stand up for what was right. We didn't say anything initially, but we were even willing to negotiate down to $60,000 if Nancy wanted to discuss it further. However, she immediately counteroffered with $20,000, arguing that she shouldn't have to pay anything at all for something that rightfully belonged to her. When we told her that was far too low, she responded by saying she understood how much effort we had put into the house and acknowledged the cost of materials. She then condescendingly offered to add an extra $5,000 for all our work, bringing her offer to $25,000. When we explained that $50,000 was the amount we had paid Tom for the house initially, Nancy became upset, accusing us of being liars and thieves. She claimed the house was a complete dump and that there was no way it was worth that much. Her resorting to name-calling and derogatory remarks about our dream home, which we had poured our blood, sweat, tears, and money into, was the last straw. We firmly told her to leave, making it clear she was no longer welcome and that we would never sell the house to her, even if she offered double its market value. Nancy left in a huff, hurling insults as she went. Not long after, we discovered she was spreading malicious rumors throughout the neighborhood, claiming we had stolen the house from her and other unfounded allegations. Initially, we ignored the gossip, believing no one would take it seriously. However, things took a dangerous turn when a man pulled into our driveway with a gun, threatening us and demanding we vacate the house. We had never met this man before, but we had heard of him. He fancied himself the neighborhood's peacekeeper, confronting anyone he deemed a troublemaker. Many residents, especially in our rural area where law enforcement was sparse, appreciated his efforts to maintain order. Our neighborhood was divided into two main sections, one filled with older, retired folks who lived peacefully, and another with less law-abiding citizens further into the wilderness. We lived on the edge of the peaceful part, separated by about a mile of woodland and farmland from the more unruly section. Recognizing the man from descriptions we had heard, we decided to take a calculated risk. We invited him in for a beer and a chat, reassuring him that while he could bring his gun, we would also have ours. In our town, almost everyone owns a gun, and it's not unusual to see someone carrying one. It's more a statement of self-defense capability than a direct threat unless pointed at someone, which he didn't do. He accepted our invitation, and after a few hours of conversation and explaining the situation, he admitted that he had gotten caught up in the rumors and reacted impulsively. He apologized for the misunderstanding, explaining that it wouldn't happen again. He also thanked us for buying the house, noting that the neighborhood had been much quieter since Sam moved out. The loud parties and drunken teenagers roaming the streets at night had been a constant nuisance, and everyone was relieved to have some peace and quiet again. Despite the initial tension, we managed to clear the air and establish a good rapport with the neighborhood peacekeeper. He promised to set the record straight with the other residents and help dispel the rumors Nancy had been spreading. Over time, the atmosphere in the neighborhood improved, and we found ourselves enjoying the community more and more. We all had a good laugh about the situation afterward, and Mr. Peacekeeper left without saying another word. Now, let me explain why he believed the rumors so easily. This is a bit of a side story, but it's also a major turning point when everything started to go downhill for Nancy. The events of this side story do overlap slightly with the next part of the story, but let's dive in. Nancy had divided her property, giving a quarter of it to build a convenience store. This store quickly became a favorite in the neighborhood due to its prime location in the center of the area. It wasn't popular for its prices, as they overcharged for nearly everything, nor for its customer service, which typically consisted of a simple thank you for your purchase as you walked out the door. Occasionally, they would issue a refund if you found mold on the food, which was a rare yet appreciated gesture. The store's popularity stemmed from being the only convenience store for miles around. If you needed groceries but didn't want to drive all the way to town, this store was just a short trip away. Even we put aside our differences and shopped there often because it was literally next door to us. The store's convenience earned it a positive reputation in the neighborhood. Everyone wanted to keep their local store and would dare anyone to try and take it from them. Back then, everyone thought Nancy and her family were good people. When Nancy started spreading rumors about us, people tended to listen. The outlandish rumor about us stealing the house was dismissed as ridiculous. But people believed the smaller, petty rumors. There were plenty of these, but they were mostly minor and didn't really matter. Even assuming all the rumors about us were true, there was much more that could be said about some other people in our neighborhood, so no one paid much attention. However, they did avoid us, not wanting to get on Nancy's bad side for fear of being banned from her store. So, they ignored us and left us alone. A few years later, Sam got out of prison. With nowhere else to go, Nancy allowed him to move back in. She didn't like the idea of him living with her, so she rented him an apartment above her convenience store and forbade any wild parties on her property. He didn't have to pay rent. His only responsibility was running the store when Nancy and her family were busy, which wasn't often. Despite everything that had happened, Sam still hadn't learned his lesson. While running the register, he would often double charge for items and pocket the extra money. We noticed this several times and went back for refunds. They always made excuses, claiming the register was broken. After noticing a pattern, we brought it to Nancy's attention, letting her know that Sam was double charging people and likely pocketing the extra money. Although Nancy was entitled, even she wouldn't stoop to something so blatantly illegal. We liked her little store and didn't want anything bad to happen to it. However, instead of thanking us for bringing this to her attention, she accused us of trying to sabotage her business and defended Sam. Nancy's refusal to acknowledge the issue only fueled more resentment and mistrust in the neighborhood. People began to realize that maybe Nancy and her family weren't as upstanding as they seemed. The store's reputation started to suffer, and so did Nancy's standing in the community. Over time, the situation escalated. More neighbors began to experience the same double charging issue, and despite Nancy's attempts to cover for her son, it became widely known that something shady was happening at the store. Eventually, fewer people shopped there, preferring to make the longer drive to town rather than deal with the dishonesty. Nancy dismissed our concerns, essentially telling us to mind our own business in a very polite yet condescending manner. So we obliged and shared the information with some of our friends in the neighborhood. It had taken years to even get some neighbors to acknowledge us, let alone talk to us, thanks to Nancy's earlier rumors. However, we had finally made some friends, partly through bringing Christmas treats to our neighbors each year, a gesture that brightened their day and slowly built goodwill. Our friends appreciated the information, though they admitted they found it hard to believe. Despite this, word quickly spread through the neighborhood. Soon enough, Mr. Peacekeeper showed up in our driveway again, this time much friendlier. He had largely ignored the rumors about us, knowing most of them were false, and we had developed a more cordial relationship since his initial visit. He would occasionally stop by for a beer and chat about neighborhood happenings, seeking our opinions on various matters. He did this with everyone, ensuring he spoke to most residents at least once a year to keep things calm and peaceful. He preferred this community-driven approach over having police frequently patrolling the area, a sentiment shared by most residents, including us. However, he was not pleased with the rumors we were supposedly spreading about Nancy and her little shop. He explained that he had already spoken to them, and they attributed the issues to register malfunctions, considering it a misunderstanding. He warned us to stop spreading these rumors to avoid further problems. Although we wanted to show him proof, we doubted he would believe us over Nancy, especially since she had dismissed the discrepancies as simple register errors. So, we apologized for any trouble caused, explaining our intention was merely to protect the few friends we had made. He accepted our apology, issued a final warning, and left. We decided to avoid shopping at Nancy's store unless absolutely necessary. Despite this, things changed over the next few years. As people in the neighborhood became more vigilant about checking their receipts, they started noticing the same patterns we had pointed out. Even though Mr. Peacekeeper tried to reassure everyone that the rumors were false and born out of our property dispute with Nancy, the community's trust in the store began to waver. During this period, Sam likely pocketed substantial amounts of money, and it became evident that Nancy was aware of his actions, but chose to ignore them, attempting to silence any dissent with more rumors. The nature of small country stores like hers is such that they rely heavily on regular customers from the neighborhood, especially during the winter months when tourism dwindles. Then it finally happened. Mr. Peacekeeper connected the dots and realized the truth. His reaction was explosive. We could hear him next door, furiously confronting Sam and Nancy. His anger was palpable, and it was immensely satisfying to witness. But that was just the beginning. Mr. Peacekeeper didn't stop at confronting them. He went door to door, informing every single resident in the neighborhood about what had transpired. We didn't care too much about the disputed property because we had lived there for years, thinking it actually belonged to Nancy. To make things easier for everyone, we offered to sell it to her, or even trade it for a portion of her property. There was a section of her land that connected with ours, which was extremely inconvenient for her to maintain. Extending our property a bit would make it easier for us to take care of and give us more space for our projects. However, Nancy flatly refused, insisting that she would never pay for something she believed already belonged to her. She wouldn't even consider trading her property, especially after accusing us of stealing the disputed land from her. Since then, a huge ongoing property dispute had erupted between us. Now, a bit about where we live. It's a very rural area with numerous irregular property lines. Property boundaries here are often not straightforward. Many deeds are centuries old and use temporary landmarks like large oak tree to large rock next to stream to describe property lines. Many of these landmarks could be referring to multiple things or may have disappeared long ago. Thus, property disputes are quite common in our area, likely an understatement. Adding to this complexity is the fact that even a tiny piece of property can be incredibly valuable in certain situations. This has led our state to establish very strict laws and regulations governing property disputes, surveyors, and related matters. For example, just a few years ago, a landowner won a property dispute against a large corporation over just 1 acre of land, costing the corporation and earning the man over $1 million. Back to our story, our property lines were pretty clear since Nancy had created them herself fairly recently. However, the strict laws regarding property lines and surveyors in our state didn't make the situation any easier. Surveyors might be easily bribed by large corporations facing the loss of millions of dollars for a tiny piece of land, but that's not fair to the rightful landowner. To balance this, Our state makes it so that surveyors have everything to lose from lying, as does the person who bribed or blackmailed them. In our state, if a surveyor, even by honest mistake, gives a bad survey by just a few feet, not only can they be fined heavily, but they will also lose their license and be barred from surveying again in the state. Additionally, they must notify and refund all their clients for up to 10 years before the incident occurred. These clients then have the option to request an additional survey by a non-affiliated surveyor at the original surveyor's expense. This applies to every customer from up to 10 years prior to the incident, and everyone since then as well. If the surveyor is not found to have accepted a bribe or blackmail, the previous clients can sue them for any damages caused by changes to the property line due to their bad survey, as well as charge them appropriate rent for any property omitted during that time. If a surveyor is found to have accepted a bribe or blackmail, all damages and additional fees are transferred to the person who bribed or blackmailed them. This, along with the loss of time and money from court proceedings and the general hassle caused, makes surveyors in our area actively avoid anything that even resembles a property dispute. When a dispute occurs, you can imagine it's not as simple as making a phone call to get a surveyor to come out. It was also complicated by the fact that Nancy was adamant about her claims, further entrenching the situation. Unfortunately, before we could find a surveyor, Nancy managed to hire one herself. Whether she bribed them or not, the surveyor produced a property line report that aligned exactly with Nancy's claims, except for one small detail that she conveniently overlooked. According to the surveyor, our property extended to within a foot of her house. This amusing twist gave us a bit of leverage, but it was nothing compared to the larger portion of land Nancy was trying to steal from us. Whenever we attempted to hire a surveyor, Nancy would somehow always manage to introduce herself to them. She would casually mention that her property had already been surveyed and subtly hint at an ongoing property dispute. This was enough to scare off any potential surveyor, given the strict regulations and severe consequences involved in property disputes. Oh, and I forgot to mention that the land markers from the bank surveyor placed when we bought the property conveniently disappeared before we moved in. It's a mystery how that happened, but we'll probably never know. At this point, hiring a surveyor would likely cost us as much as the disputed land itself, if not more, assuming we could even find someone willing to take on the job. The quotes we received were astronomical, understandable given the risks involved. We started saving up in hopes of eventually hiring someone, which brings us to just a few months ago, the climax of this long saga. A few months ago, a severe storm hit our area, knocking down a tree on the disputed property. The tree was situated right next to the road, and when it fell, it caused significant damage to our neighbor's property across the street. Additionally, it totaled a brand-new sports car passing by at the time. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but the cleanup took several days. During this period, we received a bill in the mail for over $200,000, more than our house and property were worth even after all our renovations. For those who might not know, most property or home insurance policies do not cover damages to others' property. Those costs fall on the property owner. If your property damages someone else's, and it's deemed preventable like cutting down a risky tree near a road before it falls, you are fully responsible for the damages. That's how it works where we live. So when we got the bill from an unknown wealthy individual's insurance company for their totaled sports car, we called them and explained that the tree in question was not on our property. The insurance company asked us a few questions and promised to investigate. About a week later, we received another letter from them, this time with a copy of the deed and a property line printout. The tree was clearly marked in red, indicating it was on our property. They demanded full payment within 30 days of the initial notice, or they would take us to court. At this point, we had roughly 2 weeks left. We called the insurance company again, insisting the tree was not on our property. The agent, while polite, was firm, implying that unless we could prove otherwise, we were responsible for the damages. Given the gravity of the situation and the potential financial ruin, we desperately sought another surveyor, hoping to finally resolve the matter definitively. The insurance agent was dismissive, implying we must be brain dead to believe the tree wasn't on our property. They insisted it was impossible for the property line on the printout to be so far off. In response, we simply provided them with the contact information for the surveyor Nancy had hired. The agent sighed, said they would contact the surveyor to investigate further, but reiterated that we had about 2 weeks to arrange payment if our claim couldn't be confirmed. We never heard back from them. Remember the severe consequences for providing false survey results? Even if the surveyor admitted to accepting a bribe, the compensation wouldn't cover his potential losses. He would likely have to leave the country. There was no way he would give the insurance company a different report from what he had provided us and Nancy. When we later called the insurance company to check on the status, the agent seemed pleased. While they couldn't divulge much due to confidentiality, they did confirm that Nancy had also disputed the claim, asserting the property wasn't hers. The surveyor had reaffirmed his original results. Given that we weren't disputing the survey results, and considering the surveyor was hired by Nancy, the insurance company saw no reason to doubt the validity of the survey. They concluded that Nancy was fully responsible for all damages caused by the fallen tree. They couldn't say more, but we were satisfied with that outcome. As you might guess from the backstory, Nancy didn't have much trouble paying the hefty amount to the insurance company, though she was clearly displeased. We don't know her exact financial situation, but she managed to settle the bill without selling any more of her land. Since then, we've kept quiet about the property dispute, although we are still considering saving up to hire a surveyor to reclaim our land. At this point, it's more about principle than the land itself. Nancy's demeanor towards us has shifted noticeably. She is clearly not pleased that we let her keep the disputed land. It's free land, how could anyone complain about that? Nevertheless, she could try to spread rumors about us, but it would likely backfire. We've made friends with a good portion of our neighborhood, and nobody trusts Nancy anymore, especially after they discovered that Sam was stealing from everyone under their noses with her knowledge. Nancy is now stuck between a rock and a hard place. While we sit back and watch the fires she started burn her down. We can't wait to see what happens next. Oh, and here's a little extra for those who enjoy some additional details. While contemplating a privacy fence, we decided to install an invisible dog fence for our pets. For those unfamiliar, it's a small electrical wire you bury underground. A special collar on the dog's neck beeps if they get too close, a sound they dislike. If they keep going, it delivers a mild shock. We don't believe in shock collars, so we had to be convinced of its necessity. One of us decided to test it out, ensuring it was safe and humane for our dogs. One of us decided to test the invisible dog fence by holding the collar and walking across the line. It was a sensation you could feel, but it didn't really hurt, just left a slight tingling. The idea was to condition the dogs to respond to the beep before allowing them free rein, so they would ideally never feel the shock, just hear the beep and turn around. We hoped this setup would let our dogs roam around the yard without being cooped up inside all day. At the time, we couldn't afford a real privacy fence, so we installed the invisible fence well within our property, partly because the wire wasn't long enough and partly to keep our dogs away from Nancy's property. Nancy must have thought we were marking where we wanted to place a privacy fence or something because she accidentally ran over it with her lawnmower. This happened despite the wire being more than 5 feet inside our claimed property line. We all learned that day that electric lawnmowers don't mix well with electrified wires. Her mower was completely ruined, every electrical component was fried. She had to buy a whole new mower just because she wanted to be petty and run over our markers. The best part was that since the wire was so far inside our property line, she couldn't blame us. Though she tried spreading rumors, they didn't gain much traction. It would have been absurd to accuse us, so she didn't even attempt to. Nancy never asked us to buy her a new mower or anything. She probably knew how we'd respond if she did. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the story. I have another one about a different situation where my mother's malicious compliance cost her company over $100 million and got her entire department permanently shut down. But it's late now, and I'm heading to bed. I'll share that story tomorrow or sometime soon, so keep an eye out for it.